We are on Ayin Amud Aleph 70A1. We're going to go into this. We're still discussing Bittul Rishus, a person going ahead and relinquishing their rights. And so first we're going to quote the last part of the Mishnah, and then we're going to quote a brisa, which we're going to unpack today. Okay, so we're going to learn a lot of principles about relinquishing rights. So here we go. So Ein Not L'Rishus, top of 70A1 or Ayin Amud Aleph. So the Mishnah says that a person, two, are not allowed to receive rights. Okay, so if it's given to two, if let's say you have six, all of us are in this chutzner, and two of us, Max and myself, did not go ahead and join the Eruv, so all of you cannot relinquish the rights to both of us. Okay, which, as if you recall from yesterday, we already discussed. So the Gemara is going to ask, Hasu Lamali, why do I need this? The Mishnah already said that two residents cannot acquire cannot receive the rights from everyone else. So why? Because remember, what's the reason why not? Because Max and I did not join the Eruv, then imagine, so basically, and you all relinquish your rights. What that means is that you're all now not part of this Eruv. Fine, so now it's just me and Max. And if we didn't make an Eruv, it's meaningless. It doesn't do anything because it's two people to make an Eruv. So Gemara says, Lama li, why do I need this ruling? We already saw it. Lo tzricha, afagav ze'omer le knei amanas lahaknos. Even in a situation where all of you went ahead and gave it to Max and said, Max, I'm giving it to you on condition that you go ahead and give it to me, right? That would still not work, because at the end of the day, since there's two of us and it was not given to only one of us, really truly only given to one of us, it was given still to two of us, therefore the relinquishing does not work. And even if not only in the first case where it was given simply to both of us, that certainly doesn't work, but even in the case where it was given to one of us on condition that you then go ahead and transfer all the rights to one, it still will not work. Okay, that's the end of our... That's the end of the discussion of our Mishnah, and now we are going to discuss a brisa. But first, we're just going to begin with a question. Abaye asks Rabba. Let's say you have 5 people living in one chutzner. This is okay. Where are 6 people? Okay, whatever. 5 people living in one chutzner, and one of them forgot and did not join the Eruv. So let's say I'm the guy who. Yeah. Any case we're going to have, right? So whatever this case, we'll use ourselves over here. So when our case over here, where I come in on Shabbos, according to Beis Hillel, I could do the relinquishing on Shabbos. So I come in, you guys all made an Eruv, and then like, what? I thought you weren't here for Shabbos. Too bad, I'm here. And now what do? So when I go ahead and do Bittul Rishus, could I just do it to Murray? Do I have to do it to every single one of you? That's the question that Abaye asks Rabbah. Amrle, Rabbah says, I have to explicitly relinquish my rights to each and every one of you. I'm going to relinquish my rights to you. I'm going to relinquish my rights to you. I'm going to relinquish my rights to you. Fine. That's the way it works. Esvei, now Abaye is going to question this based on a brisa. And ultimately, this is going to be the background to our entire subsequent discussion today about whether or not Bittul Rishus has to take place to each and every one, or it can be done just to one person in the property. Okay? So in the courtyard. So Esvei. Okay, so Abaye challenges Rabbah from a brisa, which is going to have a number of different parts, 7 different parts. Let's see. Echad shelo erav nosr rishus leechad she'erav. So let's say you have one resident who did not join in the Eruv. He is allowed to give his rights to one who did join in the Eruv. Now that case has to be explained a little bit, because clearly we're not talking about just a case where there's 2 people in a courtyard. Why not? One's the other, and that would not do it. There's no Eruv, meaning one person forgot to do the Eruv and one person did do an Eruv. But if one person did an Eruv with who? Eruv by definition means you are being ma'arev, you're joining together with others. So we're missing some details in that first case, so just noting that, flagging that, so we'll come back to that, fine. That's case number 1, it works. So once the other, it works, again, we need more details in that case. Case number 2, Shnaim she'ervu, 2 people who joined in the Eruv, nos m'shusan le'echad shlo Eruv. They're allowed to give their rights to one person who did not join in the Eruv, right? So let's say you have 3 people in a courtyard, 2 of them already made an Eruv, they're allowed to give their rights to one person who did not make the Eruv, and now that one person is allowed to carry, okay, carry into the courtyard. Ushnaim shlo ervu, 2 people who did not join in an Eruv, nosnin rishusan l'shnaim she'ervu, are allowed to give their rights to 2 people who did join an Eruv, okay, so again, 2 of us who did not make an Eruv are allowed to give to 2 of you who did make an Eruv, o le'echad shlo Eruv, or 2 people give to 1 person who did not join an Eruv. All those are cases of Eruvs that do work. However, now the last 3 cases are going to be cases of Eruv does not work. Avalo echad she'erav nosr reshuso le'echad shelo Eruv. A person who did join in the Eruv is not allowed to give his rights to one person who did not join in the Eruv. Again, that case also is going to need some explaining, because if there's an Eruv there that one person joined and one person didn't, again, there must be more people there, or else this case makes no sense, right? So again, one person who did join in the Eruv is not allowed to give his rights to one person who did not join in the Eruv. We'll come back to what that case is all about. Ve'ein shnayim she'ervu, nos l'shusan l'shnayim shelo ervu. 2 people who were part of an Eruv cannot give the rights to people who are not part of the Eruv. Why? That's our first case. That's the case we discussed earlier today. And that is because if, let's say, two of you made an Eruv and then you gave it over to two of us who did not make an Eruv, what are you left with? You're left with two people who did not make an Eruv, and then we can't carry still, because since we didn't make an Eruv and we're two people, what's combining us? And therefore, we can't carry. And case number 3, vein shnaim shlo ervu, nosten rishusan l'shnaim shlo ervu. Similarly, two people who did not make an eruv cannot give their eruv, cannot go ahead and be mevatel rishus, cede their rights to two people who did not make an eruv. It wouldn't help, because now there's no eruvs, and therefore no one can carry. Okay. Ketani mia resha. Let's go back to the very first line in the brisa. It said, Echad shelo erav noser mishuso le'echad she'erav. One resident who did not join the Eruv is allowed to give his rights to one who did join the Eruv. Hey chidami, what's this case talking about? If there's no other person, again, the first line in the brisa was, one person is allowed to cede his rights, right? Again, I just want to read the line. Echad shelo Eruv, one person who did not join the Eruv could cede his rights to one who did join the Eruv. So I'm going to ask, what's the case? If there's no other person in this chatzer other than, the two of them, then bahadei man Eruv. Who did, when it said that the first person did make an Eruv, who did he make an Eruv with? Himself? That's not an Eruv. It must be that there's another person in the courtyard. And the Brisa says that me, who was not part of the Eruv, am allowed to give it to you, Tzvi, who is part of the Eruv. Who are you with the Eruv? You're the Eruv with Andy, right? So the point is that even though I'm only giving it to Tzvi and not to Tzvi and Andy, nonetheless it works. So what does this show us? This is a question on Rabbah. Remember, Rabbah said, this is how the whole discussion began. Rabbah said that when I cede my rights, I have to say, I cede my rights to you, and I cede my rights to you. But this brisa that says that one person who did not make an Eruv is allowed to cede his rights to the person who did, again, there must be another person there, or else the brisa doesn't make any sense. Because why would you make an Eruv you can't make an Eruv by yourself? So it must be, again, you made an Eruv with Auntie, and what it's saying is, I'm allowed to go ahead and cede my rights just to Tzvi, and not have to explicitly cede my rights to Andy as well. And there's a question on Rabbah, who said I have to cede my rights to each one independently. Yeah? Make sense? Simar says, no. The Rabbah says, and the Brisa says, again, I'm allowed to give it to cede my rights to one and not to both. So this goes against Rabbah. The Rabbah answers, Dahava umis. No, there were two people there. There was a second, but really, we're not talking about a case where there's Tzvi and Andy. Rather, there was a case of Tzvi and Bob died. Bob died in the middle of Shabbos. So Tzvi went ahead and made an Eruv with Bob, right? And then, that's why he made an Eruv. And then when it says that I go ahead and cede my rights to one person, he really is the only person there. And therefore, now it makes sense. Okay, and you made an Eruv, meaning you made an Eruv with Bob. Bob's no longer living. But I made the Eruv, now I go and I cede my rights to you. Okay? Ask the Gemara, Ida have miss. If you want to say the case of the Brisa is where there was another person in the Chatzar in the courtyard, and then he died, Ema Seifa. So we're going to assume at this point that assumption that there's another person there and died is going to be consistent throughout the Brisa. So what about the end of the Brisa, which says, Aval Ein, we're at 678 too, Aval Ein echad she'erav, noser shus le'echad shelo erav. That one who did not join in the Eruv is not allowed to give his rights to one who did not join in the Eruv. Okay, so that's the case later on in the Brisa. It says that one person who did not join in the Eruv, one person who did join in the Eruv is not allowed to give his rights to one person who did not join in the Eruv. Okay, so what that's saying is that Tzvi, who went ahead and joined in the Eruv, is not allowed to give his rights to me, who did not join in the Eruv. So ask the Gemara, V'dahavu miss, am I lie? But if there was another person there, and the person died, right? Then why not? It's just two people in a courtyard. If there's two people in a courtyard and no one made an Eruv, what are you allowed to do? I could cede my rights. Again, forget if there's no Eruv ever made, and there's just two people in an Eruv, I could go ahead and I could give my rights to the other person. So why over here, if we're talking about a case where Tzvi made the Eruv with the person who now died, okay, so Bob is no longer here, and then Tzvi wants to go ahead and give me the rights to the courtyard, it should work. Why does the Brisa say it doesn't work? If it's really just the two of us because third party died, it doesn't make sense. Elapshita de Isay. It must be that no, the third party is still there. It must be that Bob is still alive, right? And Uminaseifa Isay, right? And that's what's going on. What's going on is that Tzvi and Bob made an Eruv. Bob is still alive, and now Tzvi is giving me his rights, but Bob is not giving me his rights. If only one person gives rights over, then it doesn't work. Right? So it must be in the Seifa, in the end case of the Brisa, it's clear that there are two people around, and that's the only way to make sense of the Brisa, which says that if Tzvi gives me his Eruv, his rights, it doesn't work. Why would it not work? It must be because Bob is still here. And if Bob is still here in the Seifa, in the last part of the Brisa, when we Seifa Isa, Reshanami Isa, it should be, the Brisa is consistent. In the first case also, we should assume that Bob is still alive. And then, again, this goes back to being a question on Rabbah, because Rabbah wanted to say, oh, Bob died. Well, if Bob died, then why in the Seifa doesn't it work? It must be Bob is still alive. And then go back to the Reisha. What did the Reisha say? That if I give my rights only to Tzvi and not to Bob, it still works, right? This is a proof against Rabbah. It's saying that I only see my rights to one of the two people, it still works, right? Again, the assumption is if there is if there's a unique element to the case in one part of the brisa, you're going to assume that unique element to the case, which is unstated, is going to be in the end parts as well. There's going to be consistency. To which the Gemara says, "Midi area, is that necessarily so? Hakidi isa, vakidi isa." No. In the first case, the Bob died. And that's why when I go ahead and give my rights to Tzvi, it works. Because Bob is no longer living and therefore it's just one person. In the Seifa, maybe in the second case, Bob is still living. And there, when Tzvi gives me his rights and Bob is still alive, it doesn't work. Right? So therefore, don't ask a question, it's going to be, no, sometimes you can have a brisa where one case you're going to have to make an ukimta, what's called an ukimta, like I don't know how to translate well in English, but the point is that you're going to have to make like a detail that is not mentioned in that case, okay? I.e., Bob is dead, right? And then in the second case, that sounds a little dramatic. In the second case, you're not going to have to make the dokimta and just say that Bob is still alive, and that's why it doesn't work. But there isn't necessarily consistency in terms of the cases being exactly parallel. And now Rabbah goes on the offensive. Rabbah says, I'll prove to you my point that really you don't have to, relinquish rights to everyone. Teda, let me prove it. Tiktani Seifa to Reisha, because at the ends of the first part of the Brisa, what does it say? It says, Ushnaim Shlo Ervu, two people who did not join an Eruv, Nostin Rishusan, Lishnaim She'ervu. They give their rights to two people who did join the Eruv. Again, the terminology is two people, let's say Max and I did not join the Eruv, we go ahead and we give it to Tzvi and to Adina. We go ahead and we give it to both of them explicitly, right? Why both of them explicitly? L'shnaim lachalo. If I were just to give it to Tzvi, it wouldn't work. Who's that approved to? To Rabbah. Rabbah who said you have to give it to each person. Said that the two of us give it to the two of you. Clearly we have to give it to each of you and not just one of us. Okay, Vabaye Amar Abaye says, no, that's not a proof. My l'shnayim, what does it mean that we give it to both of you? La'echad mishnayim, to one of the two of you. Ask the Gemara, Ihachi lisni la'echad she'erav. So it should say, to one of the residents who joined the Eruv, or la'echad shlo Eruv, or to one who did not join the Eruv. In other words, the terminology is not precise according to Abaye. It doesn't fit very well, kasha. Therefore, the Gemara says, you're right, it's not perfect according to Abaye. It's not like when we say kasha, it's a difficulty. It means that we haven't disproven Abaye, but the Brisa doesn't read so well according to Abaye. Okay? So again, the debate over here between Abaye and Rabbah is when a person relinquishes rights, or two people relinquish rights, do they have to go ahead and do so to every person part of the Eruv, or only to one of them? This past Brisa supports Rabbah. It's not a question on Abaye. Let's go further. Says the Gemara analyzed the Brisa further and tries to bring proofs one way or another, but also is just simply going to be analyzing the Brisa. So, Echad shlo Eruv noser reshus le'echad she'erav. The first part, the Brisa said, the first ruling of the Brisa said that one person who did not join the Eruv, did not join the Eruv, gives it to one person who did join the Eruv. L'Abaye d'isei. According to Abaye, that first case is talking about a case where there is a third party still alive. And that's the novelty of the first case. The first case is that I, who am not part of the Eruv, I never joined the Eruv, I give it just to Tzvi, even though Bob is still alive. Okay, and the Kamash Malan and the novelty of that first teaching, of that first line, the thing that's coming to teach us is that I don't have to relinquish rights to each and every one of you, as long as you do it to Tzvi, that's sufficient. L'Rabbah to habumis, and according to Rabbah, the case is where Bob was there, but Bob died. Okay, so what's the novelty of this case? V'lo gazer zimnim de'isei, and what the Bryce is coming to teach us is that we don't make a decree. In other words, one could have thought that in a case where Tzvi and Bob made a Eruv, and then Bob dies, you may think that I can't go ahead and give my Eruv to Tzvi, even though he's the only person there, because it's a pretty rare case. Like, the person's going to die, they made an Eruv, they died in the middle of Shabbos, and maybe I should make a decree and say, well, what about, I'm going to get confused, and what about in a case where someone's not going to go ahead and live in Bob's house, and I'm going to think, I only have to relinquish my rights to Tzvi. I will not realize that if they're both alive according to Rabbah, I'd have to do it to both of them. So maybe I should make a decree that even though it's only Tzvi right now because Bob died, but that's such a rare case, normally, therefore I shouldn't be able to even relinquish my rights in this case. I should be stuck. A rabbi is coming and say, no, the Bryce is coming to teach us. I don't make such a decree that I'm allowed to just give it to Tzvi because if Bob died, I don't have to worry about it. Okay, that's case number one. Okay, now second ruling of the Brysa, Ushnaim she'ervu nosrim reshusin le'achad shelo erev. Two residents who joined the Erev are allowed to give their rights to the one who did not join the Erev. Pshita, that's obvious, right? In other words, if there's three people in the Erev and two people did not go ahead, two people did not make an Erev. Two people did make an Erev, one did not. Right? So, of course, two people who made the Erev are allowed to say, okay, well, we really like you, Murray, and we want to make sure you're able to carry your Gemara out of your house, and therefore we'll go ahead and we'll relinquish our rights to him, even though it's the minority. It doesn't matter. And that's obvious. Why wouldn't that work? So, Madatem, I would have thought, came into the Erev, I would have thought that since Murray did not join the Erev, we should knas him. We should say, you're not allowed, this doesn't work. That maybe, in other words, until now we've been the whole notion of relinquishing is normally, it's when I'm the guy who messed you all over. You all made an Erev. I show up on Shabbos and you're like, oh, why didn't you make an Erev? So fine, so I can relinquish my rights to you. But who says I'm allowed to go ahead? Who says that the relinquishing should work in the opposite direction? That you should all be able to relinquish your rights to me or to Murray or to someone who did not make an Erev. Wow, even though you did make an Erev, we're going to help you? Maybe we should knas. We say, no, it shouldn't work. Even though logically it should work, we say, no, maybe we'll say, you to make an Erev. We're not going to do any favors. We're not going to have this leniency. Kamash B'la, no, we are going to, no such penalty is instituted. Okay, third ruling of the Brayso. Two people who did not join the Erev are allowed to give their rights to two people who did join the Erev. Okay, so the Rabbah Tana Seifeli Galuya Reisha. According to Rabbah, the last case of the Braysa is to clarify the beginning of the Braysa, as we said earlier. In other words, it's teaching us that two people who made an Erev, did not make an Erev, have to give to both explicitly to the two people who did make an Erev, to Tzvi explicitly and to Andy explicitly, because you're part of the Erev. And that's what the purpose of that case of 2 to 2 is, to teach us exactly this, that when we relinquish our rights, we have to do it to each to both of you, to individually to both of you, right? According to Abaye, this case is necessary, right? So why? Okay, you may have thought that we should ban two people from relinquishing rights to two people that made an Erev. Why? Because sometimes you may confuse it, right? If Max and I did not make an Erev, I keep on switching people, I'm sorry, I hope this is not confusing. If Max and I did not make an Erev, and we relinquish rights to Tzvi and Adina, right? So that we're allowed to do that, because you all both made an Erev. That's cool. But you may confuse this and say, oh, what about in the opposite case? Maybe if you both did make if you both made an Erev, you could relinquish rights back to us. Now that would be a problem. Since we did make an Erev, you'd be left with an area that can't be carried. You might confuse the cases, Kamash Malan. So that's what Abaye understands, that is coming to teach you. We don't make that decree that Max and I, who did not make an Erev, could relinquish our rights to Tzvi and Adina, who did make an Erev, and we're not worried that Adina and Tzvi are going to go ahead and relinquish the rights to us, which would be meaningless and be problematic. We're not afraid we're going to confuse the cases. Okay, third ruling of the Braysa. Two people who did not join the Erev are allowed to give the rights to two people who did join the Erev. Okay, did I just read that? Yes, I just read that. Yeah, thank you very much. Or two residents are allowed to give it to one who did not join the Erev. Let's say again, Mia, Max, and I did not make an Erev. We're allowed to give it, and there's only one other person here. We did not make an Erev. We could give our rights to one person who did not make an Erev. Right? So let's say a case, no one made an Erev. It's Shabbos morning, and we're like, we know I made an Erev. We're a very lazy, courtyard, and we never make an Erev. And then we're like, oh, Tzvi actually needs to go ahead and carry his talis out this morning. So we're so nice. So Max and I will go ahead and we'll relinquish our rights to him. No one made an Erev in this place. Two people can relinquish to one, which makes sense. Meaning there's only one person who now is the Baal, is the person who's owning, because we've given his rights. So Lamali, why do I need this? It should be obvious. When it says Madatema, maybe the whole concept of relinquishing only works where at least some people made an Erev. In other words, until now, all the cases where there was someone made an Erev. This is a case where no one made an Erev, right? So maybe the whole notion of relinquishing only works where some people made an Erev. But in the case where no one made an Erev, this case where none of us made an Erev, we're like, no one's making an Erev in this case. Maybe we should penalize them and say, no, you can't do relinquishing in a scenario where no one made an Erev, because people are going to forget you even need to make an Erev, right? In other words, people are going to come to this court and say, oh, you guys make an Erev? An Erev? Why do we make an Erev? We always relinquish rights, and then eventually people forget to relinquish rights. Right? So Kamash Malad, we don't make such a decree. And even in a case where no one made an Erev, right? So this could come up in a scenario. Let's say a person again is sitting in like one of these whatever, vacation places, and no one makes an Eruv, and people want to carry, and it's surrounded, it has walls around it, and you realize in the middle of Shabbos, like, no one made an Eruv, because you live in Baltimore, and you forgot that you even need an Eruv, you never learned Eruv in Amud Yomi, so you forgot this whole thing. So what do you do on Shabbos? There's 5 of you sitting in this place, so you can all go ahead and relinquish your rights to one of the people, and that's fine, and that person go ahead and carry. Okay, and no one else will. At least one person carry. Very nice. Good. Okay, further. One person who did not join the Eruv is not allowed to give his rights to one person who did not. One person who did join the Eruv cannot give his rights to one person who did not join the Eruv. So Labaye Tana Seifa Legule Reisha. According to Abaye, the last part of the Brisa clarifies the earlier part, right? So meaning that clearly there's another person here, right? In other words, remember Abaye used the Reisha, the Reisha was a little unclear. Abaye said clearly in the Seifa, there must be another person there. Or else, why doesn't this work? Right? Why would not one person not be able to give the Eruv to relinquish his rights to another person, unless there's another person there? And Abaye said, since there's another person there in the Seifa, it must be there's another person in the Reisha, and therefore he proved his point that you only have to relinquish rights to one person. L'Rabba adatani Reisha tananami Seifa. Rabba says no. Right? Remember, Rabba said that the cases are not consistent. In the Reisha, one person died. In the Seifa, someone's there. So why does it use this terminology? Just to have consistency. Remember, keep in mind we've mentioned this so many times, and that is that the Brisas, we're reading them. They memorize them, right? Mishnah's Brisas, they memorize them, and the more things are, have a consistency, the easier it is to remember. If you're going to have a case like this, 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 it's very hard to remember, and sometimes the Brisas, just for the sake of consistency, even though technically it might be easier and more accurate to teach a halakha in a very particular fashion, but for the sake of memorizing, I'll teach consistent cases so that you'll memorize the cases. Okay. Ve'ein shnayim, sixth ruling of the Brisa. Ve'ein shnayim she'ervu nosrim reshus l'shnayim shelo ervu. 2 people who join the Eruv are not allowed to give the rights to 2 others who did not join the Eruv. Hasu lamali. Of course, 2 people who join an Eruv cannot give it to 2 people who did not join an Eruv. That's the case where, again, Adina and Tzvi are giving it to, who made an Eruv, cannot give it to Max and myself who did not make an Eruv, of course, because it won't work. Lo tricha devat lechan minaya lechavre. It's a case where, and we saw this already yesterday, where then Max goes ahead and then relinquishes after Adina and Tzvi gave the rights to both of us. Max says, now I'm giving my rights. He gives them to me. So, you may think it's allowed. Lest you kamashman came into beina debata lo havle shar yusuf hachatzer. Since when Adina and Tzvi gave their rights to both of us, nothing happened. Since you give your both rights to both of us, since there's 2 of us who don't have an Eruv, the whole domain is still usher. So therefore, Max has nothing to, so to speak, give me at that point. It doesn't work. And that's why it's coming to teach us so low. So basically it's teaching us that it's not effective. Last case, 2 people who did not join in the Eruv, Max and myself, cannot give the rights to Tzvi and Adina. It's 2 people who did, different case. So Max and myself who did not join the Eruv cannot give their Eruv now to Murray and Andy who did not make an Eruv either. We didn't make an Eruv, you didn't make an Eruv, we can't give it to you. Okay, Hasu Lamali. Now that's very obvious. There's no Eruv there. Why do I need this? L'tzricha da'amras kinei amanas lahaknos. That case is where we're saying to you, Max and I say, we give it to both of you, but we say, we're really giving it to Andy. We say, Andy, you acquire it and then give it over to Murray. So that case you may have thought would work, but since we did not actually only give it to one person, we gave it really to 2 people with the intention of one of the 2 people giving it to another person, that doesn't work. The only way it works is if all of us, Andy, Max, myself, give it to Murray, that's the only case it works. But if there's any way where we're giving it to 2 people, which as we know does not do anything, since if 2 people don't have an Eruv, it's meaningless, then it won't work. Even if we gave it to you with explicit instructions, you, Andy, give it to Murray, it would still not work. Okay, we finished explaining the Brisa, and we'll discuss a little bit more about relinquishing rights, God willing, tomorrow. Have a great day.